Dothraki, Sir Jorah Mormont said as he ruined to a halt beside her, on top of the ridge. Beneath them, the plain stretched out immense and empty, a vast flat expanse that reached to a distant horizon and beyond. It was the sea, Dany thought. Past here there was no hills, no mountains, no trees, no cities, no roads. Only the endless grasses, tall blades rippling like waves. When the winds blew, it's so green, she said. Hear it now, Sir Jorah agreed. You ought to see it when bloom comes, all dark flowers, from the horizon to horizon, like a sea of blood. Come to the dry season, and the world turns the color of old bronze. And this is only Harrenhal, child. There are a hundred kinds of grasses out there. Grasses as yellow as lemons, as dark as indigo. Blue grasses and orange grasses, and grasses like rainbows. Down in the Shadowlands beyond Asha, they say that there are oceans of ghost grasses, taller than a man on a horseback, with stalks as pale as milk glass. It murders all other grasses, glows in the dark, with the spirit of the damned. The Dothraki claim someday ghost grass will cover the entire world, and then all life will end. That thought gave Dany a shiver. I don't want to talk about that now, she said. It's so beautiful here. I don't want to think about everything dying. As you will, Khaleesi, Sir Jorah said respectfully. She heard the sounds and voices turn to look behind her, and Mormont had outdistanced the rest of their party. Now the others were climbing and ridged below. Her handmaids, Ira and her young archers of Galas, were fluid as centaurs. But Cersei's still struggling with the short stirrup and the flat saddle. Her brother was miserable out here. He ought never to have come. Master Ilroy had urged him to wait in Pentos, had offered him the hospitality of his menace. But Cersei would have none of it. He would stay with Drogon until the debt had been repaid, until he had been crowned until he had had the crown he had been promised. And if he tries to cheat me, he will learn the sorrow what it means to wake the dragon. Cersei had vowed, laying on his hand on his borrowed sword. Ilroy had blinked at that and wished them a good fortune. Dany realized that she did not want to listen to any of her brother's complaints right now. The day was too perfect. The sky was deep blue, and high above them, haunting hark circled. The grass steeds swayed and sighed with each breath of the wind. The air was warm on her face, and Dany felt at peace. She would not let Cersei spoil it. Wait here, Dany told Sir Jorah. Tell them to stay. Tell them I commanded. The knight smiled. Sir Jorah was not a handsome man. He had a neck and shoulders like a bull, and coarse black hair through his arms, and chest so thickly that there were none left for his head. Yet his smile gave Dany comfort. You are learning to talk like a queen, Daenerys. Not a queen, said Dany, a Khaleesi. We wheeled her horse about and galloped down the ridge alone. The descent was steep and rocky, but Dany rode fearlessly, and the joy of the danger of it was sung in her heart. All of her life, Cersei had told her that she was a princess. But not until she rolled her silver, as Daenerys Targaryen had felt like one. At first it had not come easy. The Khalasar had broken camp the morning after her wedding, moving east towards Valis Dothraki. and by the third day Dany thought she was going to die. Saddle sword opened her bottom, hideous and bloody. Her thighs were calf raw, her hands blistered from the reins, muscles on her legs and back were so racked with pain that she could scarcely sit. By the time dusk fell, her handmaidens would need to help her down from her mount. Even the nights brought no relief. Khal Drogo ignored her when they rode, even when he had ignored her during the wedding, and spent his evenings drinking with his warriors and blood riders, racing his prized horse, watching women dance and men die. Dany had no place in these parts of his life. She was left to sup alone, with her Ser Gyroy and her brother, and afterwards to cry herself to sleep. Yet every night, sometime before dawn, Drogo would come to her tent and wake her in dark, and ride her as relentless as they rode his stallion. He always took her from behind, Dothraki fashion, which Dany was grateful. That way her lord husband could not see the tears that wet her face, and she could hear her pillow to muffle her cries. When he was done, he would close his eyes and begin to snore softly, and Dany would lie beside him, her bloody, bruised, and sore, hurting too much for sleep. Day followed day, and night followed night, until Dany knew that she could not endure a moment longer. She would kill herself rather than go on, she decided one night. Yet when she slept that night, she dreamt the dragon dream again. Verces was not in it this time. There was only her and her dragon. Its scales were black as night and wet and slick with blood. Her blood, Dany sensed. Its eyes were pools of molten magma, and when it opened its mouth, flame came roaring out like a hot jet. She could hear it singing to her. She opened her arms to the fire, embraced it, let it swallow her whole, let it cleanse her, and temper her, and scour her clean. She could feel her flesh sear and blacken, and sloth all away. Could feel her blood boil and turn to steam, yet there was no pain. She felt strong, new, and fierce. Yet the next day, strangely, she did not seem quite to hurt so much. It was as if the gods had heard her and taken pity. Even her hands may notice a change. "Khaleesi," Jaqwaquin said. "What is wrong? Are you sick?" "I was," she answered, standing over the dragon's eyes that Ilroy had given her when she wed. She touched the largest of the three, running her hand slightly over. Black and scarlet, she thought, like the dragon in my dream. The stone felt strangely warm beneath her fingers. Or was she so dreaming? She pulled her hand back nervously. From that hour on, each day was easier than the one before it. Her legs grew stronger, her blisters burst, and her hands grew calluses. Calloused. Her soft eyes toughened, supple as leather. The Khal had commanded the handmaid Ari to teach Dany to ride the horse, to ride it in Dothraki fashion, but it was the filly who was her real teacher. The horse seemed to know her moods, as if they shared a single mind. With every passing day, Dany felt surer in her seat. The Dothraki were a hard and unsentimental people. It was not their custom to name their animals, so Dany thought of her only as the Silver. She had never loved anything so much. As the riding became less and more dear, Dany began to notice the beauties of land around her. She rode ahead of the Khalasar with Drogo and his blood riders. So she came to the country fresh and unspoiled. Behind them the great horde might tear the earth and muddy the rivers, and send up clouds of choking dust, but the fields ahead of them were always green and verdant. Yet crossing the rolling hills of Nervos, past traced farms and small villages, where the townfolk watched anxiously from atop the white stucco walls. They forded 3 wide passage rivers, and the 4th of the swift and narrow trenches. Now Anne treacherous camped beside the high blue waterfall, skirted and tumbled ruin of the vast dead city, where ghosts were said to moan among the blackened marble columns. They raced down Vermilion roads, made 1,000 years old, and straight as the death rocky arrow. For half a moon they rode through the forest of Quayar, where the leaves were made in golden canopy high above them, and the trunks of the trees were wide as city gates. There were great elks in that wood, and spotted tigers and lemurs, with silver fur and huge purple eyes, but all fled before the approach of the Khalzar, and Dany grew no glimpse of them. But then her agony was fading memory. She still ached after her day's riding, yet somehow the pain had sweetening to it, and each morning she came willingly to her saddle, eager to know what wonders waited for her in the lands ahead. She began to find pleasure in her nights, as if if she still cried out when Drago took her, it was not always in pain. The bottom of the ridge, grasses rose around her, tall and supple. Dany slowed to a trot and rode out into the plain, losing half of her green, blessed alone. In the Khalzar she was never alone. Calhoun Dragoon came only after the sun went down, but her husband handmaids fed her and bathed her and slept by the door of her tent. Drago's blood riders and the men of her Khaleesi would never fall. Her brother was on welcome shadow, day and night. Dany could hear him on top of the ridge. His voice shrilled with anger as he shouted the Shajara. She rode on, submerging himself deeper in the Dothraki sea. The green swallowed her up. The air was rich with the scents of the earth and grass, mixed with the smell of horse flesh and Dany's sweat, the oil in her hair. Dothraki smells. They seemed to belong here. Dany breathed it all in and laughed. She had a sudden urge to feel the ground beneath her, to curl her toes in the thick black soil. Swinging down from her saddle, she let the silver graze, while pulled off her high-bottom boots. Verses came upon her sudden as summer storm, his horse rearing beside him as he reined up too hard. "You dare!" he screamed at her. "You give commands to me? To me?" He vaulted off from the horse, stumbling in his hand. As he landed, his face was flushed with the struggle back on his feet. He grabbed her, shook her. "Haven't you forgotten who you are? Look at you! Look at you!" Dany did not look. She was barefoot, with oiled hair, wearing Dothraki riding leathers, and painted vest given her as a bride gift. She looked as though she belonged here. Verses was soiled and stained in city silks and rainbow. He was still screaming. "You do not command the dragon. You understand, I am the Lord of the Seven Kingdoms. I will not hear your orders from your horse, Lord Slut. Do you hear me?" His hands were under her vest, his fingers digging painfully into her breast. "Do you hear me?" Dany shoved him away hard. First he stared at her, his lilac eyes incredulous. She never defied him, never fought back. Rage twisted his features. He would hurt her now, and badly. She knew it. Crack! A whip made a sound like thunder, and the coil took Verses around the throat and yanked him backwards. He went sprawling into the grass, stunned and choking. Dothraki riders hooded him and struggled to set him free. But as he struggled to get free himself, the one with the whip, young Jago, rasped a question, and Dany did not understand his words. But by then, Ira was there, Sir Gyro and the rest of her Callas. Jago asked if you would want him dead, Khaleesi's. Eerie said. "No," Dany replied. "No." Jago understood that. One of the other barks at the commandment, and Dothraki laughed. Harry told her, "Cora thinks that you take an ear to teach him respect." Her brother was on his knees, his fingers digging under the leather coils, crying incoherently. struggling for breath. The whip was tight around his windpipe. "Tell them I do not wish him harm," Danny said. I repeated her words. In Dothraki, Jarrow gave a pull on the whip, and yanked Verces around like a puppet on a string. He went sprawling again, freed from the leather embrace, a thin line of blood under his chin where the whip had cut deep. "I warned him not what would happen, my lady," Sir Jorah Mormont said. "I told him to stay on the ridge as you commanded." "I know you did," Danny replied. "Watch for Verces." He laid on the ground, sucking the air noisily, red-faced and sobbing. He was a pitiful thing. He had always been a pitiful thing. Why had he never seen that before? Why had she never seen that before? There was a hollow place inside her where fear had taken his horse. Where fear had been. "Take his horse," Danny commanded Sir Jorah. Verces gaped at her. He could not believe what he was hearing, nor could Danny quite believe what she was saying. Yet the words came out. "Let my brother walk behind us, back to Khalasar. Among the Dothraki, the man who does not ride was no man at all, the lowest of the low, without honor or pride. Let everyone see him as he is." "No!" Verces screamed. He turned to Sir Jorah, pleading the command tongue with the words of his horsemen, who would not understand. "Hit her, Mormont! Hurt her! Your king commands it! Kill these Dothraki dogs and teach her!" The exiled knight looked from Danny to her brother. She barefoot, with dirt between her toes and oil in her hair. He with the silks and the steel. Danny could see the decision on his face. "He shall walk, Khaleesi," he said. He took her brother's horse in his hand, while Danny remounted her silver. Verces gaped at him and sat down in the dirt. He kept his silence, but he would not move. His eyes were full of poison as they rode. Soon he was lost in tall grass. When they could tell when he was a Moor, Danny grew afraid. She went back to him, asked Sir Jorah as they rode. Even a man as blind as your brother should be able to follow our trail," he replied. "He is proud. He may be too ashamed to come back." Jorah laughed. "Where else would he go? He cannot find Khalasar, or the Khalasar will most surely find him. It is hard to drown the Dothraki sea, child." Danny saw the truth in that. The Khalasar was like a city on the march, but it did not march blindly. Always scouts ranged far ahead main column, alert for any signs of game or prey or enemies, while outriders guarded their flanks. They missed nothing, not here. In this land, the place where they had come from, the plains were part of them, and of her now. "I hit him," she said, wondering in his voice. Now it was over. It seemed like some strange dream that she had had. Sir Jorah did not... Sir Jorah, do you think he'll be so angry when he gets back? She shivered. "I woke the dragon, didn't I?" Sir Jorah snorted. "Do you can you wake the dead, girl? Your brother Ragnar was the last dragon. He died on the Trident. Verces less than the shadow of a snake." His blunt words startled her. It seemed as though all things that she had always believed in were suddenly called into question. You swore him your sword." "That I did, girl," Sir Jorah said. "And if your brother is the shadow of a snake, what does that make his servants?" His voice was bitter. "He is still the true king." "He is." Jorah pulled up his horse and looked at her. "Truth now, would you want to see Verces sit a throne?" Danny thought about it. "He would not be a very good king, would he? There have been worse, but not many." The knight gave him heels on his mount and started off again. Danny rode close beside him. "Still," she said, the common people are waiting for him." Magister Ilboy said they are sewing dragon banners and praying for Verces to return across the narrow sea to free them. The common people pray for rain, healthy children, and summer that never ends. Sir Jorah told her it no matters what the High Lords play their Game of Thrones, as long as they left in peace. He gave a shrug. "You are never Danny rode along quietly for a time, working his words like a puzzle box. It went against everything that Verses has ever told her to think that people could dare so little whether the true king was of spur reign over them. Yet the more she thought of Gyro's words, the more they rang truth. "What do you pray for, Sir Gerard?" she asked him. "Home," he said. His voice was thick with longing. "I pray for home too," she told him, believing it. Sir Gerard laughed. "Look around you, Khaleesi." But it was not the plains Danny saw. It was the King's Landing, the great red keep that Aegon the Conqueror had built. It was Dragonstone, where she had been born. In her mind's eye, they buried with 1,000 lights, the fire blazing in every shadow. In her mind's eye, all the doors were red. "Her brother will never take back the 7 kingdoms," Danny said. "My brother will never take back the 7 kingdoms," Danny said. She had known that for a long time, she said. She realized she had known all of that her life. Only she had never let herself say the words, even in the whispers, but now she had said them for Gerard Mormont and all the world to hear. Sure, Gerard gave her a measuring look. "You think not. He could not lead an army even if my lord husband gave him one," Danny said. "He has no coin, and the only knight who follows him reveals him as less than a snake. The Dothraki make mock of his weakness. He will never take us home." "Wise child," the knight smiled. "I am no child," she told him fiercely. Her heels pressed into the sides of her mount, rousing the silver to a gallop. Faster and faster she raced, leaving Gyro and Ira and the others far behind, the warm wind in her hair and the setting sun red on her face. By the time she reached Khalzar, it was dusk. The slaves had erected her tent by the shore of the spring-fed pool. She could hear rough voices from the woven grasses placed on the hill. Soon there would be laughter when the men of her Khalis told the story of what had happened in the grasses today. By the time Verses came limping back among them, every man, woman, and child in the camp would know him for a walker. There was no secrets in the Khalzar. Danny gave her silver over to the slaves for grooming, and entered her tent. It was cool and dim beneath the silk. As she let the door flap close behind her, Danny saw the finger of dust light reach out and touch her dragon's eggs. Across the tent, for an instant, 1,000 droplets of scarlet flame swam before her eyes. She blinked and they were gone. Stone, she told herself. They are only stone. Even Ilroy said so. The dragons are all dead. She put her palm against the black egg. Fingers spread gently across the curve on the shell. The stone was warm, almost hot. "The sun," Danny whispered. "The sun warmed them as they rolled." She commanded her handsmaid to prepare her bath. Daryr built a fire outside the tent, while Eerie and Jacqueline fetched a big copper tub, another bright gift from the packed horse that carried it from the water pool. When the bath was steaming, Ira helped her into it and climbed in after her. "Have you ever seen a dragon?" she asked, as Ira scrubbed her back and Jacqueline seduced the sand from her hair. She had heard that the first dragons had come from the east, from the shadow lands beyond, the sea, and the islands of the Jaded Sea. Perhaps some were still living there, in the realms strange and wild. "Dragons are gone, Khaleesi's," Ira said. "Dead," agreed Jacqueline. "Long and long ago." Verses had told her that the last Hagaran dragon had died no more than a century and a half ago, during the reign of Aegon III, who was called the Dragon Blade. Bane. That did not seem so long ago to Danny. Everywhere, she said, disappointed. Even in the east, magic had died in the west. When the doom fell on Valerie and the lands of Long Summer, and neither Spellforged steel nor Stormsingers nor dragons could hold it back. But Danny had always heard that the east was different. It was said that manticores prowled the island of the Jaded Sea, and the basilisks infested the jungles of the Yurti, and the spellsingers Warlock and the Aeromancers practiced their arts openly in Alice, while Shadowbinders and Blood Mages worked terrible sorcery in the black of night. Why shouldn't there be dragons too? No dragons, Ira said. Brave men killed them, for dragons terrible evil beasts. It is known, agreed Jacqueline. The trade from court once told me that a dragon came from the moon. Blonde Dahir said she warmed the towel over a fire. Jacqueline and Eerie were of age when Danny and Dothraki girls taken slave when Draco destroyed their father's Khalasar. Doherty was older, almost 20. Magister Elroy had found her in a pleasure house in Linz. Silver-white hair tumbled across her eyes as Danny turned her head, curious. The moon. He told me the moon was an egg. Khaleesi, the Linz girl said once there was 2 moons in the sky, but one wandered too close to the sun and cracked from the heat. 1,000 dragons poured forth and drank the fire of the sun. This is why dragons breathe flame. One day the other moon will kiss the sun too, and then it will crack and the dragons will return. The 2 Dothraki girls giggled and laughed. You are foolish straw-head slaves, Ira said. The moon is no egg. Moon is God. Woman wife of the sun. It is known, Jacqueline agreed. Danny's skin was flushed and pink when she climbed from the tub. Jacqueline laid her down to oil her body and scrape the dirt from her pores. Afterward, Ira sprinkled her with spiced flowers and cinnamon, while Doherty brushed her hair until it shone like spun silver. She thought about the moon and the eggs and dragon. She spurred her supper was a simple meal of fruit and cheeses and fried bread with Danny commanded it when she sent her other handmaid away. And the Lys girl had her hair the colour of honey, and the eyes of summer skies. She lowered those eyes when they were alone. You honour me. The moon had risen. They sat together, talking. You honour me, Khaleesi, she said, but it was no honour, only service. Long after the moon had risen, they sat together, talking. That night, when Calhoun Dragon came, Danny was waiting for him. She stood at the door of her tent and looked at her with surprise. She rose slowly and opened her sleeping silks to let them fall on the ground. This night we must go outside, my lord, she told him, for the Dothraki believe in all things of importance in a man's life must be done beneath the open sky. Calhoun Dragu followed her into the moonlight, and the bells in his hair tinkled softly. A few yards from her tent was a bed of soft grass. It was there that Danny drew him down. When he tried to turn her over, she put his hand on his chest. No, she said, this night I would look on your face. There was no privacy in her heart for the Khaleesi. Danny felt eyes on her as she undressed him, heard the soft voices as she did things that Doherty had told her to do. It was nothing to her. She was not Khaleesi's. His was the only eyes that mattered, and when she mounted him, she saw something that she had never seen before. She rode him as fiercely as ever she had risen her silver, and when the moment of his pleasure came, Calhoun called out her name. They were on the far side of the dark grassy sea when Jacqueline brushed the soft swells of Danny's stomach with her fingers and said, Khaleesi, you are with child. I know, Danny told her. It was her 14th name day.